Imagine growing up surrounded by smiling faces, faces that say all the right things but whose eyes betray a shadow. Relatives who cheer for you with sweet words but swallow hard every time you succeed. This is the silent reality for many, an emotional maze where the enemy isn't out there but sits at your table, toasts with you during celebrations, and hugs you on your darkest days. How do you protect yourself from family envy when the very people meant to love you may secretly resent your light? This is the dilemma Sigmund Freud dared to confront as he descended into the deepest layers of the human psyche. Freud believed there is no affection without ambivalence. Behind a congratulations may lie suppressed rage. Behind I'm happy for you may lurk the unconscious wish for your downfall. Envy, he argued, isn't simply a moral flaw. It's a structural conflict between the ego and unfulfilled desire. And when envy is born within the family, it carries an archetypal force, almost mythical. Siblings compete for parental love. Parents project their failures onto their children, and what looks like harmony becomes a battlefield of suppressed emotions, subtle silences, and hidden rivalries. Have you ever felt guilty for achieving something? Noticed a glance that lingered a second too long, a silence that screamed, a compliment that tasted like criticism? That's not paranoia. Freud teaches us that family envy thrives in the shadows. It doesn't attack with fury, but with whispers. It dismantles not through chaos, but through tiny sabotages, casual comments, quiet judgments, soft-spoken doubts that gnaw away at your sense of worth. And if you don't learn to spot these signs, you may spend your whole life shrinking yourself just to stay accepted. But here's the truth, few are willing to face. You should never dim your light to soothe the darkness in others. Freud believed true emotional maturity comes when we learn to distinguish genuine love from neurotic attachment, when we stop equating love with the need to make ourselves smaller. Protection doesn't always mean cutting people off. Sometimes it means seeing clearly. It means standing in your truth, even if it casts shadows on someone else's illusions. This video isn't a revenge plan. It's not a list of obvious signs. It's a Freudian journey through the heart of family drama. A descent into the roots of guilt, desire, and repression. And if you've ever felt the need to protect yourself from the very people who should protect you, stay with us until the end. Because by the time this story concludes, you won't just understand envy. You might finally be free from it. Childhood is the first stage where the drama of family envy unfolds, quietly, invisibly, and often without recognition. Freud taught us that our earliest rivalries are not born in the outside world, but in the home, where siblings unconsciously compete for the exclusive love of the maternal figure. This primitive desire for being the only one, the center of affection, plants the seed of frustration, jealousy, and eventually, envy. Though it may seem like innocent childhood behavior, the emotional blueprint is etched deep into the psyche, and it follows us into adulthood disguised as subtle resentments. In Freud's view, the family is both the nest of safety and the battlefield of the soul. It is where the ego takes shape, but also where we learn, often through pain, that repressing emotions is the price of survival. When one family member rises, through financial success, a loving relationship, or inner growth, they often unknowingly trigger a profound emotional rupture in others, the pain of comparison. And when one's self-worth is built on fragile foundations, this comparison turns into resentment, masked behind polite silence, passive disapproval, or unexpected distance. The dangerous thing about envy within the family is that it seldom speaks clearly. Freud reminded us that the unconscious is a master of disguise. It camouflages the unacceptable. The envious sibling cloaks their bitterness in concern. A sarcastic remark arrives dressed as a joke. Emotional withdrawal is justified as being busy. Most of the time, the envious one doesn't even know they are envious. They genuinely believe their doubts, criticisms, or dismissiveness are rational. And this makes family envy particularly insidious. It hides in plain sight. What follows is guilt. Guilt for succeeding, guilt for receiving attention, guilt for being loved in a way someone else wasn't. But Freud showed us that guilt, more often than not, is the unconscious mind's way of maintaining inclusion in the emotional tribe. The psyche learns early, to shine too brightly may lead to exile. So many adults continue to shrink themselves, sabotaging success just to preserve emotional belonging, because the fear of being envied can feel more threatening than the pain of remaining small. And so, the first act of protection is not confrontation, it's awareness. Freud insisted that what is made conscious can be transformed. When you begin to notice the tone, the body language, the patterns hidden in words and silences, you take back power. Envy that stays unnamed becomes a silent poison. But once you see it, truly see it, it can no longer move in the shadows. That's where psychic protection begins. As we grow older, family envy doesn't disappear, it evolves. What once was sibling rivalry becomes subtle power dynamics, emotional manipulation, and role expectations that suffocate authenticity. Freud would call this the return of the repressed. Old emotional wounds re-emerge, but in disguised forms. The brother who always needed validation becomes the critic of your every move. The cousin who felt invisible now mocks your ambition. What you're witnessing is not about you. It's a mirror of their inner conflict. The unconscious, Freud taught, cannot tolerate disparity for long without creating defenses. When someone in the family system breaks a cycle, succeeds where others failed, heals what others ignored, rises beyond the ceiling of inherited pain, it creates discomfort. It destabilizes the unspoken equilibrium. You become a walking contradiction to their narrative of limitation, and the ego, fearing annihilation, strikes back through projection. You're arrogant. You changed. You think you're better than us. But none of this is truly about you. The envious family member sees in you the part of themselves they buried long ago, the potential they denied, the dreams they abandoned. Your progress awakens their pain. Freud called this the narcissism of minor differences, the idea that those closest to us, with whom we share the most, are often the ones who envy us most bitterly. Why? Because your success is a constant reminder of what they could have been had they made different choices. This creates a paradox. You may want to include them, celebrate with them, share your journey, but they cannot meet you with joy. Not because they hate you, but because they haven't yet learned how to love themselves without comparison. Freud might argue that their hostility is a defense mechanism, an armor to protect a fragile ego from collapse. And so, your victories become threats, not gifts. Your presence, instead of inspiring, becomes unbearable. So how do you protect yourself without closing your heart? The answer is psychological boundaries, not walls, but internal clarity. You do not owe explanations for your evolution. You do not have to dilute your joy to soothe someone else's wound. Freud emphasized that true individuation requires separation, not in distance, but in identity. To protect your psyche, you must stop seeking approval from the very sources that feel most unsafe. That's not cruelty, that's maturity. The roots of family envy, Freud would argue, go deeper than rivalry. They grow from the soil of unprocessed desire. Every family member carries with them unconscious expectations, hopes and disappointments passed down across generations. The child becomes the projection screen of the parent's unlived life. The siblings become competitors in an invisible tournament, scored not by achievement, but by emotional validation, and no one is truly aware of the game they're playing. This dynamic often creates a strange type of loyalty, one that punishes difference. Freud called it the repetition compulsion, the drive to recreate familiar pain rather than confront the unknown. So when you begin to break the pattern, heal, change, or even simply say no, you're not just threatening their sense of self, you're breaking a family spell. And this will often trigger envy, not because of what you did, but because of what you represent, the courage to change. That's why envy within families feels so personal. It attacks where it hurts most, your identity. Comments may target your values, your dreams, your very way of being. The envious one doesn't just disagree, they seem to resent that you exist as you are. But according to Freud, this is projection at work. What they cannot accept in themselves, they attack in others. Your self-expression becomes intolerable because it evokes their buried longings. To endure this without collapsing emotionally, you need more than logic. You need emotional grounding. Freud believed that insight alone is not enough. The unconscious must be made conscious and integrated. That means knowing your truth and choosing to embody it, even in the face of rejection. Especially in the face of rejection. Protection, in this sense, is not about escape. It's about staying rooted in who you are without seeking external permission. When you do this, something shifts. The power they had over you dissolves. The guilt, the shame, the obligation, they no longer bind you. And this inner shift, though invisible, creates an unmistakable aura of self-possession. Freud would call it sublimation, the ability to transform raw pain into inner strength. You're no longer trying to fix or heal your family through your sacrifices. You are free to live your own life, fully, unapologetically. There's something haunting about realizing that your greatest wounds may come not from strangers, but from those who are supposed to protect you. Freud explored this paradox deeply in his theory of ambivalence, the idea that love and hatred can coexist in the same relationship. You may feel a strong bond with a sibling or parent, yet simultaneously feel unseen, criticized, or diminished by them. This emotional duality creates inner confusion, making it harder to name what's happening. You second-guess your instincts. You begin to ask, am I imagining this? But envy doesn't need to scream to be destructive. Often it whispers. It appears in the way they celebrate you with a delay or not at all. It lives in their need to bring you back down to earth when you're finally feeling proud. Freud would interpret this as a defense mechanism, reaction formation. They disguise hostility as care, mask resentment as concern, and project their discomfort onto your behavior. The more you shine, the more they shrink, and the more they need you to shrink too, just so they can breathe. This is why family envy is so difficult to confront, not because you lack courage, but because you fear the cost. What happens if you speak your truth? Will you be accused of being sensitive, dramatic, ungrateful? Freud warned that within families, the greatest truths are often the most forbidden. They threaten the illusion of unity. They expose the emotional contracts built on silence, and so many endure quietly, losing pieces of themselves to preserve peace that isn't even real. But protecting yourself isn't about declaring war. It's about waking up. You begin to see the subtle signs not as isolated incidents, but as a pattern. You stop making excuses for disrespect. You no longer interpret their discomfort as your fault. Freud believed that the psyche seeks coherence, and once you acknowledge the dissonance between their words and their energy, you reclaim your psychological integrity. You stop needing their approval to believe in your own worth. This awakening may feel lonely, but it's the birthplace of authenticity. You stop performing for acceptance and start living for alignment. You recognize that you can love your family and still protect yourself from their unconscious sabotage. That's not betrayal, that's individuation. It's the sacred rite Freud believed every adult must undergo, the process of separating your identity from the expectations of your origin. You are not what they feel about you. You are what you choose to become in spite of it. At the heart of envy lies a deeper wound, the inability to tolerate someone else's joy. Freud would say that envy emerges when one's internal reality is too painful to bear, and another's happiness becomes an unbearable mirror. The envious person doesn't actually hate your success. They hate their perceived inability to have it too, and instead of confronting that pain, they target the trigger, you. In families, this pain is often masked as tradition, hierarchy, or loyalty, but underneath it is the same raw emotion. Why not me? What makes this even more toxic is that you often care deeply for these people. You want to share your victories, invite them into your growth, and offer them the best parts of your journey. But instead of feeling celebrated, you feel punished. Freud spoke of the narcissistic injury, the wound to one's ego that comes when someone close shines too brightly. It disrupts the illusion of equality. It reminds them of what they repressed, and rather than face their unfulfilled life, they lash out at the nearest symbol of what they've denied, you. This often leaves you in an emotional bind. Do you downplay your joy to keep the peace? Do you isolate to avoid the drama? Freud might say this is the unconscious attempting to resolve cognitive dissonance, the conflict between love and self-protection. But the more you hide, the more you betray yourself. And that betrayal over time turns into resentment, not just toward them but toward yourself. Because deep down you know shrinking never saved anyone. It only prolongs the pain. To protect yourself, you must reclaim your right to be seen, not through arrogance but through grounded self-respect. You learn to celebrate without explanation, to succeed without apology, to shine without guilt. Freud believed that repression creates neurosis. When you deny what is true for too long, it leaks out through anxiety, depression, and chronic self-doubt. But when you express your truth, even silently, you restore internal order. You are no longer at war with yourself. This is the turning point. You are no longer the child seeking love at any cost. You are the adult defining what love truly means. And love, Freud taught, begins within. You offer compassion to those who envy you, but you no longer abandon yourself to keep them comfortable. You recognize their pain, but you refuse to carry it. This is not rejection. It is release. Protection from family envy is not just a matter of boundaries, it is a spiritual act of self-definition. Freud explored how the unconscious drives most of our behavior, and unless we become aware of these forces, we will keep repeating inherited patterns. Many people live entire lives trapped in family scripts, believing that to be loved, they must remain small, agreeable, unthreatening. But love based on self-erasure is not love. It is dependency masquerading as loyalty. When you begin to untangle these dynamics, you may feel grief. Grief for the version of your family you once believed in. Grief for the innocence lost when you realized some people celebrated you less when you became more. Freud called this mourning, a necessary psychological process that allows us to move beyond illusion. You are not just protecting yourself from others, you are letting go of what you wished they could be. This grief is not a weakness, it is a sign of growth. It means you are beginning to see clearly. You are no longer confusing attachment with connection or proximity with intimacy. You may still love them, but you now see where love ends and self-harm begins. And in that clarity, you find power. Freud believed the human psyche is resilient when it aligns with truth. And the truth is this: your evolution does not require everyone's approval, only your own. You may still encounter envy. It may never fully disappear, but now you see it for what it is, a reflection of another's pain, not a measure of your worth. You respond not with defensiveness, but with dignity. You know how to stand tall without needing to explain your height. You learn to coexist with their discomfort without internalizing it as your responsibility. This is maturity. This is freedom. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of clarity. Not the silence of others, but the sound of your own voice returning to you, stronger and clearer than ever before. Freud would say you have integrated the shadow. You no longer fear what once controlled you. With time, a remarkable thing begins to happen. As you detach from the emotional traps of envy, your relationships change. Some will drift away. Some will fight harder to pull you back into the old role, but others, perhaps quietly, slowly, will begin to rise with you. Because your healing creates an invitation. Freud believed that when one member of a system changes, the entire system is forced to respond. Your growth can ignite something in others, not through persuasion, but through presence. You become a lighthouse, not shining to impress, but to guide. And some may finally realize that your success is not a threat, but a pathway, that your joy doesn't steal theirs, it expands what's possible. This is the subtle redemption that Freud rarely spoke of directly, but always hinted at, that the unconscious is not just a graveyard of pain, it is also the womb of transformation. But this transformation requires vigilance. You must continue to guard your psyche from subtle sabotage, from old guilt, from the temptation to regress. Freud warned that the pull of the familiar is strong. The child inside us still longs for acceptance. But now, you have an inner adult who can hold that child's hand and say, "We are safe now. We belong to ourselves." You no longer over-explain, overshare, or overcompensate. You don't attend emotional battles that no longer interest you. You carry your peace like armor, not to fight but to walk away when needed. Freud would call this ego strength, the ability to hold your ground without collapsing, to feel without drowning, to protect without hardening. In this new posture, you begin to attract different energy. You begin to surround yourself with those who are healed enough to celebrate, whole enough to not compete, wise enough to understand. Your rise doesn't mean their fall. You are no longer surviving your family. You are transcending it. And now standing here, you look back, not with resentment, but with understanding. Freud taught that awareness is liberation. What once confused you now makes sense. The looks, the silence, the coldness, it wasn't your fault. It was their unconscious grief, their buried dreams, their silent rage that had nowhere else to go. You were simply the nearest target. But you are no longer a target. You are a mirror that no longer shatters. You reflect only what you choose. You give love without losing yourself. You speak truth without fear. And most of all, you protect your soul not through walls, but through light. Freud would say this is sublimation at its highest, transforming pain into wisdom and envy into insight. You now live without waiting for validation. You celebrate without shame. You succeed without seeking permission. And perhaps most powerfully, you forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you do. Forgiveness is no longer a gift to them. It is the final boundary that severs their shadow from your light. There will still be moments when envy brushes your life again, but now you recognize it, you feel it, name it, and move through it. You don't internalize it. You don't kneel before it. You remain sovereign. Freud would say that this is the work of the psyche fully alive, to love without dependence, to rise without fear, and to shine without apology. And in this shining you become something rare, not just someone who survived envy, but someone who transmuted it. You become proof that healing is possible, that family history is not destiny, that love can be reborn, not through sacrifice, but through truth. And that protection does not mean isolation, it means freedom. In the quiet after the storm, a realization begins to bloom. Everything you endured, every look that diminished you, every silence that screamed, every smile that carried a blade, was never truly about you. Freud taught us that the unconscious is a labyrinth, and within it, we often become projections, not people. Your light didn't offend them. What hurt was the contrast it created against their own shadows. And now, with eyes wide open, you see clearly. Protection does not mean hiding who you are. It means refusing to carry what was never yours. Throughout this journey, you faced what many fear to even name. You looked envy in the eyes, not to accuse, but to understand. You broke the emotional spell of guilt, unwrapped the disguises of sabotage, and reclaimed your joy without shame. Freud believed that healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about integrating it, transforming pain into clarity and illusion into awareness. That's what you've done here. Not just learned, but awakened. You've walked the bridge from unconscious repetition to conscious choice. Now you stand at a different threshold, not one of defense, but of freedom. You can love without pleasing, protect without punishing, and belong without betraying yourself. The envy that once pierced now glances off the shield of your self-respect. You no longer confuse rejection with loss or approval with love. You see that every time someone tries to dim your light, it's a reflection of their own unlit path. But you have chosen to walk fully illuminated, even if it means walking alone for a while. So here is the final truth, the one Freud would nod to with solemn clarity. What you protect is not your success, it is your soul. Your right to be whole, visible, and deeply human in a world that sometimes fears what it cannot control. Let that be your legacy. Not silence, not resentment, but a radiant defiance born from compassion. Because when you protect yourself from envy, you are not closing a door. You are opening space for authenticity to finally breathe. If this journey stirred something in you, if it uncovered a truth, a memory, or even a scar, I invite you to stay. Not just as a viewer, but as someone reclaiming their inner power. Share your thoughts, your experience, or your story in the comments below. Let's make this more than a video. Let's make it a sanctuary for those who are done shrinking. Like, share, and subscribe if your voice found a home here, because the world doesn't need you smaller, it needs you real.